How is it that God allows leadership, sometimes very powerful leadership, to get away with being powerful, gifted, but then also spiritually unaccountable, right? How is it that God will allow great acts of evil under his watch? I just want to point out something here, that authority without submission always drifts towards corruption. And the reason why is because everyone needs to be held accountable to someone or something. And if they are not, something is just going to take that place. And in Deuteronomy chapter 17, we'll actually unpack how God guards worship, justice, and kingship. In this episode of Biblical Unlocked, this show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider rating the show and following. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 17, it's gathering laws about worship and authority. It's forbidding sacrifice to other gods, and it demands fair legal process with multiple witnesses, sets boundaries for hard cases, and then warns future kings not to multiply horses, wives, or wealth, but to write out and read God's law continually. So this chapter actually links purity of worship with purity of governance, how Israel worships and how Israel leads from a sort of governance or political standpoint are never separate. Okay, so the major cross-references here are going to be Deuteronomy chapter 12, which we've just read. We read that like 5 days ago. Exodus chapter 23, verses 1 to 3. That's about that governance laws. 1 Samuel chapter 8, and Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 9 to 13. Okay, so let's read the first 7 verses of this chapter. The focus here is going to be on not having defective sacrifices, and that idolaters are going to be judged by witnesses. And the engagement question for you to stay focused is, why does worship purity matter so much before legal purity? Let's read. Verse 1. You must not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has a defect, anything seriously wrong, for that is abhorrent to the Lord your God. If there is found among you, in one of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, and transgresses his covenant by going to serve other gods and worshipping them, whether the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have forbidden, and if it is reported to you, or you hear of it, and you make a thorough inquiry, and the charge is proved true, that such an abhorrent thing has occurred in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or that woman who has committed this crime, and you shall stone the man or woman to death. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the death sentence shall be executed. A person must not be put to death on the evidence of only 1 witness. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first raised against the person to execute the death penalty, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Biblical unlock number 1. Not allowed to have any defective sacrifices. All idolaters are meant to be judged by witnesses, right? So why does God begin with sacrifices and then move on to the law and the punishment? I think what's important to recognize in this ancient Israelite environment is that worship is the root of public life. If the altar is corrupted, then the whole nation will eventually be corrupted. The command against blemished offerings provides reverence, while the requirement of multiple witnesses, as we saw there, it protects justice from rage, rumor, and private vengeance. Notice, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the death sentence shall be executed. A person must not be put to death on the evidence of only 1 witness. And the idea here is, with regards to personal sacrifices, sacrifice is the shaping of inward devotion, and what you offer reveals what you love. And this is really important, especially when we considered Genesis 22, when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his own son, right? And that's because that your one and only son, that's one of the most important things in the entire world for you, and you're giving it up to show who you love, who you care about. But obviously, he stopped the sacrifice because God was going to provide his one and only son to show his love for us and not the other way around. Okay, let's see verses 8 to 13 now. The focus is going to be on how hard cases are going to go to the priests and the judges. And my question for you to stay focused is, what protects a community when ordinary judgment is not enough? Verse 8. If a judicial decision is too difficult for you to make between one kind of bloodshed and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault and another, any such matters of dispute in your towns, then you shall immediately go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose, where you shall consult with the Levitical priests and the judge who is in office in those days. They shall announce to you the decision in the case. Carry out exactly the decision that they announce to you from the place that the Lord will choose, diligently observing everything they instruct you. You must carry out the law that they interpret for you, or the ruling that they announce to you. Do not turn aside from the decision that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. As for anyone who presumes to disobey the priest appointed to minister there, to the Lord your God, or the judge, that person shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not act presumptuously again. So as we can see in verses 8 to 13, hard cases go to the priests and judges. So the question arises, why do we even have a higher court for difficult decisions? Well, that's just simply because not every case is simple, and power without accountability can breed chaos. And Deuteronomy is building a system where difficult disputes are heard in the place of God's choice. So judgment is not improvised by personalities, but formed by covenant instruction. Submission to hard judgment is in itself an act of worship, okay? And many of the church fathers insisted that leaders must be teachable and accountable, and that authority must serve truth, not self-protection, not self-serving ideals. And what's interesting here is that it says, carry out exactly the decision that they announce to you from the place that the Lord from the place that the Lord will choose. Now, it's interesting because it's almost as if these priests and these judges are acting in the position of God, or that God has given some authority, immense authority to them, because Moses then later says, you must carry out the law that they interpret for you, or the ruling that they announce to you. So in order to have this level of authority, it must be bestowed by God. And you have to carry out exactly the decision. So you cannot have your own personal bias or preference in this case. You actually have to give that up in order to serve God. Okay, so verses 14 to 20 now, final section of the chapter. The focus is going to be the rules for kings and why does God limit royal power before he even permits a king. Verse 14. When you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set over you a king whom the Lord your God will choose. One of your own community you may set as king over you. You are not permitted to put a foreigner over you, who is not of your own community. Even so, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or return the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses, since the Lord has said to you, you must never return that way again, and he must not acquire many wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Also silver and gold he must not acquire in great quantity for himself. When he has taken the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll, in the presence of the Levitical priests. It shall remain with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, diligently observing all the words of this law and these statutes, neither exalting himself above other members of the community, nor turning aside from the commandment, either to the right or to the left, so that he and his descendants may reign long over his kingdom in Israel. Notice what's happening in this particular section of verses, right? God limits kings before Israel even asks for one, right? So biblical unlock number 3 is that because power is spiritually dangerous, whether horses, which tempt military trust, wives, divided loyalty, wealth, tempts self-exaltation, the king's safeguard is not charisma, but it is daily contact with God's law. He must write it, he must read it, he must fear the Lord. So God's answer to royal pride is not merely restraint, it is scripture-based humility, diligently observing the statutes that the Lord his God has commanded. How can I apply this in our everyday life? How can I be like this every single hour, every single second of my life? And if I'm not, how can I reflect upon this to change it? Okay, so it's about treating leadership as service under judgment, not self-advancement. Okay, let's see how Deuteronomy chapter 17 points towards Jesus Christ. Deuteronomy chapter 17 points towards Christ as the true king, whose authority is perfected perfectly under the Father's will. Where Israel's kings were warned not to multiply their power, Jesus shows what righteous rule looks like. He refuses self-exaltation. He rejects worldly shortcuts, and he rules by truth, mercy, and obedience. He is the one king who does not corrupt worship or justice, because his throne is established in holiness rather than appetite. As we read in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 to 11, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in appearance as a human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him even more highly and gave him the name that is above every other name, so that at the name given to Jesus every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So he is the perfect model of godly leadership, humility, obedience, and costly service. Even though he was the most powerful person in the entire world, he took on the form of a slave. Okay, so let's see how we can apply this chapter in our everyday life. Few things that I think are important to recognize are the considerations of power, right? So everyone has an innate proclivity to seize power, to control, to impress, or to protect one's own image, right? So the great leveler of pride and power is humility. So I think if you can name one act of humility that you've done this week, whether it be apologizing, whether it be delegating, whether it be submitting to a decision that someone else wiser than you has instructed you to do, I think that would be a very good step. And the second thing is, notice what Deuteronomy chapter 17 prescribes for the king, right? For a king, Deuteronomy chapter 17 prescribes reading the Bible, following the statutes of the Lord. And that is the way we can subvert the intense desires we may have to just follow our own desires. Instead, we give it up to the Lord. We say we're going to follow the scriptures instead. Remember what I said. If you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. At the end of every single episode, I say this, and there's a reason. Because the scriptures should be the substitute for your desires. And as a result, your desires will change. So, Deuteronomy chapter 16 taught us that worship purity and justice purity belong together, that multiple witnesses and higher courts protect communities from rash and corrupt judgment, that kings are dangerous when they accumulate military power as represented by all the horses, romantic leverage with all the wives, or wealth, and that the king's true safeguard is daily submission to God's law, and that Christ fulfills kingly leadership by ruling in humble obedience rather than self-serving power. Next time we're going to move from kings and courts to the deep question of rightful provision in Deuteronomy chapter 18. We'll look at priests, Levites, prophets, and why God refuses to leave his people without guidance. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.